I am Alice, and I am 28 years old. Sometimes, when I look back at my childhood, it feels like I'm flipping through someone else's photo album. The faces are familiar, but the emotions behind them, those aren't mine. Or maybe they are, just deeply buried under years of pretending that everything was fine. I grew up in a family that looked perfect from the outside. My parents, Robert and Elaine, were respected in our town. My father ran a small but successful law firm, and my mother worked as a teacher. We lived in a big old house with a white fence, 2 cars in the driveway, and a golden retriever named Max, who was loved by everyone. And then there was my sister, Clara. Clara was 2 years older than me, but she always made sure I remembered the age gap like it was a title of authority. She had that kind of beauty that draws attention without even trying. Bright blue eyes, a perfect smile, and the kind of confidence that only comes from being constantly adored. People loved her, teachers praised her, relatives spoiled her, and neighbors always said, "You're lucky to have a daughter like Clara." My parents used to smile proudly at that, and they'd look at me with a polite, distant warmth, like I was the friend's kid tagging along for dinner. You see, I wasn't their real daughter. I was adopted when I was 4 years old. I didn't know that until I was 8. My parents never told me, not directly. I found out through Clara. She was furious one afternoon because I had borrowed her favorite hair clip without asking. It was a small thing, something only kids would fight about. But she looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. "You shouldn't even touch my things," she said. "You're not my real sister. You're just adopted. Mom and Dad felt sorry for you." I still remember that moment so clearly. The way her words felt like ice running down my spine. The confusion, the shame and the quiet panic in my chest. That night, I asked my mother if it was true. She froze for a moment, then sighed and nodded. She said I came from a difficult background, that they wanted to give me a better life. I remember how carefully she spoke, as if she was explaining charity work. My father said nothing. He just patted my head gently, then turned back to his newspaper. From that day on, something shifted in me. It wasn't about being adopted. I didn't mind that as much as the way they made me feel like I had to earn my place every single day. I started to notice the subtle things. Clara always got the first slice of cake, the better gifts, the praise that never came my way. If she got an A, my parents framed her report card. When I got one, they said, "Good job, keep it up," and moved on. But what hurt the most wasn't the lack of affection. It was how they pretended everything was equal when it clearly wasn't. I learned to stay quiet. I learned that if I wanted peace, I had to make myself small. So I did. I cooked, I cleaned, I helped my mom with groceries, and I listened to Clara's stories about her perfect friends and her even more perfect life. I thought if I just kept being kind, maybe they'd love me the same way they loved her. Maybe they'd forget I wasn't the real one. By the time I was in high school, Clara was already the center of every room she walked into. She was prom queen, cheerleader, and the golden child my parents loved to show off. I stayed in the background, quiet, responsible, invisible. When teachers praised me, my mother would say, "Yes, Alice is very mature for her age." But I could hear the quiet surprise in her tone, as if she didn't expect it. I didn't hate them. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Love is strange like that. It clings to you even when it's unwanted. I loved them all, even Clara, even when she made jokes about me being the spare child. I used to laugh along, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending I didn't notice how everyone else laughed too. My father would smile, my mother would shake her head but say nothing. It was a normal family dinner, except that I was the guest who never really belonged. After high school, Clara went to a top university on the East Coast. My parents paid for everything: tuition, housing, trips, clothes. When it was my turn, they told me they couldn't afford to send me out of state. "You'll be fine at community college," my mother said. "You're the practical one." I didn't argue. I just nodded and applied for scholarships quietly. That's when I started working part-time. I waited tables, tutored kids, and took extra shifts to save money. I didn't tell them how hard it was because I didn't want pity. I wanted to stand on my own. It wasn't easy, but it gave me something that none of them had: resilience. By the time I graduated, I had enough saved up to rent a small apartment and take an entry-level job at a local law firm. Ironically, the firm was one of my father's competitors. He didn't like that. He said, "You should have asked for help, Alice. Family helps family." I wanted to laugh at that word, family, but I didn't. I just said, "I didn't want to burden you." And that was the end of it. Clara, on the other hand, got engaged that same year to a man named David. He was charming, rich, and exactly the kind of person my parents adored. I went to their engagement party, wearing a dress I bought on sale. She looked stunning, of course. And when people complimented her, she'd smile and say, "Thank you, my little sister helped me pick this one out," as if she was doing me a favor by acknowledging me. I stayed polite, smiled for photos, and went home early. After that, we barely spoke. Life went on. I focused on my career. Slowly, I started to climb the ladder. I worked late hours, studied for certifications, and earned the trust of my boss. Within a few years, I was managing clients directly. I didn't tell my family much about my success. They never asked. In their eyes, I was still the quiet, grateful one. Then one day, my father passed away. It was sudden. A heart attack in his sleep. It broke me in a strange way. Even though I knew he never saw me as his real daughter, a part of me still loved him deeply. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, who fixed my science projects, who sometimes left small notes on the fridge that said, "Good luck on your exam." They were small gestures, but to me, they were everything. The funeral was filled with people praising his life, his achievements, his integrity. I stood beside my mother and Clara, holding back tears. Clara cried beautifully, perfectly composed, the grieving daughter everyone comforted. I stayed quiet as always. A few weeks later, my mother started to decline too. She wasn't the same after Dad died. Her health faded, her energy dimmed, and within 2 years, she was gone too. I took care of her during her last months, drove her to appointments, managed her medications, cleaned the house, made her meals. Clara visited occasionally, always with flowers and expensive chocolates, but never stayed long. She said she was too busy with work. Mom never said much during those last days, but sometimes I caught her looking at me with something that looked like regret. Once she took my hand and whispered, "You were the good one. Alice, you always were." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but those words stayed with me. After her funeral, I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe I could finally move on, live my life quietly. But life, as it turns out, has a sense of timing that borders on cruel. It was about 6 months after Mom's passing when I got a call from Clara. She sounded cheerful, like nothing had changed. "We're having a family dinner next week," she said. "Just the close ones. You should come." Something about her tone made me hesitate. We hadn't really spoken since the funeral. I asked, "What's the occasion?" And she laughed lightly. "No occasion, just family time. You should show up for once." I didn't know why, but something inside me told me to go. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the quiet longing that still lived somewhere inside me, hoping that after all this time, maybe things would finally be different. So I said yes. I spent the week thinking about what I'd wear, what I'd say, trying not to expect anything. But a small part of me still wanted it to go well. I wanted to belong, even after all these years. I wanted to walk into that house and feel like a daughter again, like a sister who mattered. When the evening finally came, I drove to our old house, Clara's house now. She inherited it after Mom's passing. The porch light was on, warm and golden, just like I remembered. For a moment, standing at the door, I almost turned back. But I took a breath and walked in. The house smelled the same, lavender and lemon polish. There were new furniture pieces, expensive and modern, but the air carried that old mix of memory and distance. Clara greeted me with a bright smile and a kiss on the cheek. "Alice, you made it!" she said, as if I'd done something unexpected. The dining table was beautifully set. There were candles, crystal glasses, and a roast that smelled divine. A few other relatives were there, uncles, aunts, and 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone looked so comfortable, chatting and laughing like nothing had ever been wrong. I smiled, sat down quietly, and tried to blend in. But deep down, something felt off. The laughter, the glances, the little whispers. It felt rehearsed somehow. And I didn't know it then, but that dinner would become the night everything changed. The night when years of quiet hurt would finally find their voice. Because before dessert was served, Clara leaned across the table with that same smirk she had since childhood and said something that froze me where I sat. Something that tore open every wound I'd ever learned to hide. When Clara leaned forward across the table, her wine glass catching the candlelight, she wore that same smile she used to wear when she knew she was about to humiliate me. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a small, practiced curve of her lips that said, "I'm in control, and you'll pretend it's fine." She clinked her fork gently against her glass and said, "Before we start eating, I want to make sure everyone's comfortable." She turned her eyes toward me, sweetly at first, and then added, "Actually, Alice, maybe you could move to the kitchen. We're kind of short on seats, and, well, real family at the main table." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel at first. It was that polite, uneasy kind of laughter people use when they're not sure if something is meant as a joke. But Clara didn't stop there. She tilted her head, pretending to think. "I'm not trying to be rude," she continued, "but adopted kids have their own special place, right? We don't want to confuse the seating arrangement." Her voice dripped with mock innocence, and that's when the laughter changed. It became real, warm, careless, and directed squarely at me. For a moment, I couldn't move. The sound of their laughter filled my ears, mixing with the faint clinking of silverware and the hum of the air conditioner. I felt my heart beating slowly, too slowly, like my body didn't want to keep up with what was happening. I glanced at the faces around me, my uncles, my cousins, even one of Clara's friends from work, and all of them were smiling. No one looked surprised. No one looked uncomfortable. It was as if this was all part of the evening's entertainment. I looked at Clara again, sitting there in her elegant dress, her diamond earrings glinting as she lifted her glass. "Don't take it personally, Alice," she said lightly. "Your family in spirit, I guess. But you know how Mom and Dad were. They always wanted to keep things traditional." My throat went dry. I swallowed and managed to say quietly, "You think this is funny?" She smiled wider. "Come on, don't be dramatic. It's just a little joke." But it wasn't a joke. It never was. It was the same message she had been sending my whole life, just dressed up in adult manners and expensive wine. Something in me broke quietly that night. Not in the way glass shatters, with noise and chaos, but like a thread snapping somewhere deep inside. I felt done. Done pretending. Done forgiving. Done staying small just to keep the peace. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. "You really want me to eat in the kitchen?" Clara shrugged. "Well, if you insist on staying here, maybe you can just..." I didn't let her finish. I reached into my bag and pulled out a large brown envelope. It had been sitting there for weeks, untouched, waiting for the right time. I placed it on the table, right next to the wine bottle, and said evenly, "Before I move anywhere, maybe you should read this." Everyone went quiet. The laughter died instantly. You could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Clara frowned. "What's that?" I leaned back, folding my arms. "A letter. From Mom and Dad." That got their attention. Clara's expression flickered for a moment, confusion replacing her smugness. "What letter?" "The one they left with their lawyer," I said. "It's their final statement, about the estate, the house, everything." My cousin, Daniel, raised an eyebrow. "Wait, what estate?" "I thought everything went to Clara." I smiled slightly. That's what everyone thought. Clara's face lost a little color. "What are you talking about? Mom's will was clear." "Yes," I said softly. "The first one was. The one you made sure everyone saw after the funeral. But apparently Mom wasn't quite done updating things. Turns out she left a letter with their attorney, It was delivered to me last month. I watched her face tighten, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Stop playing games, she said sharply. Mom wouldn't hide anything from me. Oh, she didn't hide it, I said. She just wanted to make sure I had it when the time was right. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every person who had just laughed at me moments ago. And I think tonight is the right time. I slid the envelope toward her. Go ahead, open it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Clara's husband, David, reached over and picked it up. He looked at me skeptically, then at her, and finally tore it open. The sound of the paper ripping seemed loud in that silence. He unfolded the document inside, a few pages stapled together, and began to read. At first, his expression was neutral. Then it changed. His eyebrows lifted slightly. His jaw tightened. He looked at Clara with something close to disbelief. What? She demanded. What does it say? He hesitated before handing it to her. You should read it yourself. Clara snatched the papers from his hand and began reading. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning the lines. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together. I could see the color drain from her face. When she finally looked up at me, her voice was trembling. This is fake. It's not, I said calmly. I verified it with the attorney. You can call him tomorrow morning if you like. I'm sure he'll confirm it for you. What does it say? One of the aunts asked. I turned to her, still keeping my tone steady. It says that my parents decided to divide everything equally between the two of us, Clara and me. Half of the estate, half of the assets, half of the house, everything. And there's a small trust fund in my name that they had kept sealed until now. There was a ripple of murmurs around the table. I could almost feel the tension shifting in the air, the shock, the curiosity, the sudden discomfort. Clara looked like she wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Not with all those eyes on her. You're lying, she said finally, but her voice wasn't confident anymore. I looked straight at her. You know I'm not. Mom may have played favorites while she was alive, but she wasn't blind. She saw how you treated me, especially toward the end. That's why she made sure this letter went through the lawyer, not through you. Clara stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're pathetic, she snapped. You think you can just show up after everything and take what's mine? I tilted my head slightly. Funny, I said. You've been calling it yours for years. Maybe it's time someone reminded you that I'm part of this family too, adopted or not. No one laughed now. The silence was heavy, awkward, electric. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, calm and steady, watching as the realization settled over her. For the first time in our lives, the power had shifted. I picked up my bag and started to walk toward the door. Before leaving, I paused and turned back. Oh, and Clara, I said gently, you might want to call your lawyer in the morning. You'll need one. Then I walked out. The night air was cool and quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the city, the soft rustle of leaves. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the calm settle in. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful, just free. For the first time, I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. But as I got into my car and started the engine, I realized something. This wasn't the end. The letter was just the beginning. Because if there's one thing Clara hated more than losing, it was being embarrassed. Especially in front of people she wanted to impress. And tonight, I had done both. So I knew she wouldn't let it go quietly. In the following days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Clara called me at least 20 times, but I didn't answer. Then came the texts, first polite, then angry, then almost desperate. She accused me of forging the letter, of manipulating our mother, of stealing what was rightfully hers. I ignored her. I stayed focused on my work, my life, and the quiet sense of peace that came with finally standing up for myself. But inside, I also knew I couldn't just let her attack me unchecked. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one. Only this time, I'd play it differently. I began gathering every document, every note, every email related to our parents' estate. I reached out to the attorney, Mr. Caldwell, who had handled the will. He confirmed everything again in writing. He even sent me digital copies of the signed documents, complete with time-stamped records. When I asked him if Clara had ever tried to modify the will after our mother's passing, he paused and said carefully, "Let's just say there were attempts." That caught my attention. "Attempts?" He sighed. "Yes, your sister reached out a few times. She seemed eager to finalize things quickly. But your mother's final instructions were clear. No distribution until the sealed letter was delivered to you personally. That's why it took so long." That was all I needed to hear. Clara hadn't just been cruel. She had been calculating. She thought she'd won, until the truth came out. And now that it had, she was scrambling to fix the image she'd built. I smiled quietly to myself that night as I organized the files. I wasn't planning on revenge at first. I really wasn't. But as the days went on, and I kept remembering her laughter at that dinner table, the way she told me to go eat in the kitchen like I was a servant, I realized something. People like Clara never change unless they're forced to. And I had spent my whole life being the one who swallowed pain in silence. Not anymore. This time I would make her feel the weight of every cruel word, every sneer, every time she made me feel less than human. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with calm, measured truth, and the kind of justice she couldn't talk her way out of. Because revenge doesn't always come in flames. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in calm smiles and well-written documents, and mine had only just begun. I kept my routine as if nothing had happened, worked my days, replied to clients, paid bills, but underneath that ordinary surface I was building something very deliberate. Revenge, in my mind, was never going to be a dramatic movie scene with thrown plates and shouting. I wanted something quieter, more certain. I wanted the kind of retribution that didn't rely on theatrics, evidence, procedure, and patience. I'd learned through the years that the best kind of payback is one that leaves no room for argument. The attorney, Mr. Caldwell, became my first quiet ally. He was an older man, steady, with a manner that suggested he'd seen every human drama the legal system could offer. When I'd first met with him, he had been polite, maybe even a little surprised that I'd come alone. Mrs. Bennet asked that the sealed letter be delivered to you only when it became necessary. He'd said, more to himself than to me. He explained the logistics with surgical clarity. The sealed trust, the timestamps, the signatures, the conditions my mother had set. I listened and took notes, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to know every step. Knowledge, I'd decided, would be my weapon. Clara's initial fury faded into a flurry of actions that were obvious and clumsy. She called Mr. Caldwell 3 times in as many days, trying to persuade him to reopen discussions, to question my identity, to point out supposed inconsistencies. Each call, Mr. Caldwell later told me, ended with him gently repeating what had been written in black and white. He was unmoved. "Your mother was meticulous," he said at one meeting. "She anticipated the kind of chaos people cause when they assume something belongs to them." I smiled at that, and something inside me loosened. The knowledge that the law was on my side felt like a warm, steady light, but law alone wouldn't be enough. Part of Clara's power came from reputation. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the social gloss. When people saw her in the community, they saw success. They saw a woman who had never needed to fight for anything. If I wanted to dismantle that quietly, I needed to pull the thread she'd woven since childhood, the assumed entitlement, and show, calmly and incontrovertibly, that entitlement had no legal or moral foundation. The first public move I made was hardly public at all. I wrote to our cousins, the uncles and aunts who'd always nodded politely at family functions and then retreated to the safety of their assumptions. Not an accusatory letter. God, I hate accusatory letters. But a clear, factual note. I summarized the situation, attached the notarized copies Mr. Caldwell had given me, and asked them to read it before forming conclusions. I didn't demand allegiance. I didn't plead. I simply presented the truth and gave them time. Responses came back in surprising ways. Some ignored me. Some sent sympathetic notes, short, awkward, as if they'd been startled into seeing something they'd previously waved away. A few were candid. My Aunt Rose wrote, "I always suspected there was more than we were told. I'm sorry, that line was enough. I didn't need everyone. I needed truth to trickle through the party of silence like water finding a crack." Meanwhile, Clara tried frantically to spin the narrative. Her calls became threats masked as charm. "You'll ruin the family, Alice," she would say. "Think about Mom." She tried to recruit relatives to her side with promises and apologies and, dangerously, with secrecy. She asked people to sign documents she claimed were simple inheritances, forms that would sort things out. I refused to be part of any backroom deals. I requested copies of anything anyone had signed. When they couldn't produce legitimate paperwork, when signatures didn't match, when dates were suspicious, I saved screenshots and photographed every document. There were small victories that felt disproportionately large. A cousin who had once laughed at my expense now called to ask how I was. A neighbor who had always complimented Clara's hosting skills left a polite message asking for a meeting. Each time someone reached out, I felt less like the outsider at the table and more like a rightful presence stirring a long overdue conversation. Clara's desperation grew, and with it, her mistakes. She set up meetings to discuss the will and deliberately left invitations email blasted to a few of the community's more gossipy members. She expected me to show up, to argue, to break. Instead, I sent a calm email declining, attached the attorney's summary, and asked them to settle their questions directly with Mr. Caldwell. The next day, one of the more influential people in our circle, someone who had always nodded along to Clara's stories, called Clara privately and asked, with careful politeness, if she had official confirmation. Clara stumbled. Her answers were vague. The once impeccable image of certainty she'd cultivated began to look shoddy. I used my work as a shield when needed. The law firm where I worked saw me as professional, composed, competent. I didn't flaunt what was happening in my personal life. But when Clara began to attempt public smears, rumors that I'd forged documents, that I was trying to steal family wealth, my colleagues didn't bite. They'd met Clara at school plays and charity events. They knew her beautiful surface, and also the way she thrived on applause. That helped me. Reputation these days is as much about who you surround yourself with as it is about any single truth. There was one moment that surprised me. Clara arranged a mediated meeting, a supposed family reconciliation with a counselor she'd hired, somebody polished and professional who wore soft colors and softer questions. She expected drama. She expected me to crumble. She wanted theater. I agreed to attend. Not for her, but because the counselor's presence put everything into a formal setting. Notes, signed statements, neutral observation. I arrived with copies of the attorney's files, and when the counselor asked for one version of the story, I handed them over without rancor, without embellishment. It was the contrast of calm against spectacle that did the damage. Clara answered with heat, with accusations, with the same old lines about loyalty and tradition. When she offered no documents to contradict mine, when her claims couldn't be substantiated, the counselor redirected gently, and then asked the simple question that disarmed the room. "What does your mother's written statement say?" That question was the pivot. People who had been squinting to believe the version they preferred were handed the black and white words my mother had left. And honesty is almost always boringly convincing. The counselor's notes were plain, and when they were shared with others later, with permission, it began to change the conversation in neighborhoods and dinner rooms where Clara had previously been the unquestioned authority. But legal and social pressure alone weren't going to give me the inner satisfaction I wanted. There is an emotional economy in family hurt that money and paperwork don't settle. I needed Clara to see, to feel the humanity she'd denied me. I didn't want to humiliate her cruelly. I wanted her to confront the truth of what she had done. So I devised small, unobtrusive moments meant to wake her empathy, like a carefully chosen memory brought up at a family meeting, or a photograph placed in a framed spot where she couldn't ignore it. One of the most effective was a simple thing. A school picture of the two of us at 7 and 9, smiling with our hair still full of childhood. I gave it to my aunt under the guise of a gift, a neutral offering. And by the time it made its way into a visible place in the house, it had already started conversations no legal brief could. Clara's anger turned inward. and it made her reckless. She tried to alter small details of the house's insurance. She called my workplace, attempting to intimidate colleagues into supporting her version of events, and she even threatened to sue the attorney when he refused to bend. Each escalation made her appear less credible. People tend to side with the measured party, the one who shows restraint. My restraint was not weakness. It was strategy. At the heart of it all, I wrestled with my own motivations. Revenge can be a dark river that carries you somewhere you don't want to be. I had to keep checking in with myself. What did I want really? Justice? Recognition? Or was I trying to replace the love I had always craved? I used those questions like a compass. My actions had to be clear-eyed and purposeful. I wrote in a small notebook each night. Act for dignity. Act for truth. Don't be cruel. That notebook kept me centered. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the household dynamics shifted. People who had once laughed now looked uncomfortable when Clara spoke with derisive humor. There were awkward silences at social events where Clara had always monopolized conversation. Invitations stopped arriving as freely. Her husband, David, who had once stood by her like armor, began to hesitate in public, his smiles thinner, his answers rehearsed. Power is a fragile thing when built on assumptions rather than facts. Once the facts became public knowledge, the brittle structures began to crack. It wasn't instantaneous. There were nights I lay awake, imagining more satisfying, more theatrical ways to retaliate. But the next morning, I would wake and choose paperwork over fury, phone calls over confrontation. The small, steady victories were better. A bank that had been unclear about account transfers suddenly tightened its approval processes after I provided documentation. An estate appraisal that had favored Clara was revisited. Each bureaucratic correction was a little win, boring, administrative, intimate revenge that rebalanced the scales without spectacle. And then, there was the most private moment of all. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting where Clara's latest temper tantrum had spiraled into accusations about my character, I returned to my apartment to find a small envelope under my door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "You won't stop, will you?" The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. Loopy, confident, cruel. I sat down, looked at the message, and let a smile form that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with relief. She'd noticed. She was rattled. That was the point. Not that I wanted to see her suffer. I wanted her to see the consequences of a life lived on other people's pain. I wanted her to feel the emptiness when applause fades, to know that being loved for what you look like or how well you perform is an unstable foundation. The rest would follow in due course, not because I forced it, but because reality has a way of coming home to roost. So I continued. Quietly, methodically, evidence organized, allies cultivated, truth stated plainly. Each day I felt more tethered to myself than to the desperate drama that Clara had been spinning. The war of nerves was grinding down into legal clarity and social shifts. I had begun to reclaim not just what was legally mine, but the dignity I'd been denied for decades. And with each small, inexorable step, I felt the old fear, the one that had kept me small for so long, dissolve a little more. I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. I was claiming it. There would be more to do. There would be a confrontation that could not be avoided, a reckoning that would demand faces and words, and perhaps a moment of quiet apology or hardened denial. I was ready for both. I had spent my life practicing patience, now that patience was working for me. When I finally closed my notebook that night, the same line circled twice. Act for dignity. Act for truth. Don't be cruel. I slept with the satisfaction of someone who had turned the slow gears of justice without losing herself in bitterness. The next phase I knew would be the most telling. Clara's defenses were down. She was exposed. The community's eyes were opening. And I, for the first time in my life, felt the kind of calm that precedes the end of something old and the beginning of something honest. I was not done. But I had started to win. When I got home that night, I didn't even bother to turn on the lights. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. My heart was pounding, not from anger anymore, but from a strange mix of peace and anticipation. Everything was in motion now. The lawyers, the estate, the truth. For years I'd been invisible in that family, standing at the edge of every photograph, half cropped out of the frame. Now, suddenly, I was the center of the picture, the one they had to look at, whether they liked it or not. I sat on the couch and just let the silence stretch. My phone buzzed. It was Mark, my sister's husband. I hesitated but picked it up. "Hey, Alice. Look, I know things got intense, but maybe you shouldn't make this so real." I finished for him quietly. He sighed. "You know what I mean. This is going to tear the family apart. Just think about that." I stared at the wall, tracing the shadows. "It's already been torn apart, Mark. I'm just showing them the pieces." He didn't say anything after that. I could hear the faint sound of the TV in the background. Maybe my sister crying in another room. It didn't bring me joy exactly. It just felt necessary. When I hung up, I opened the envelope again, the one that had turned dinner into a storm. Inside were 2 documents and a letter written in my mother's elegant, slanted handwriting. I'd memorized every word by now, but I read it again anyway. "My sweet Alice, if you're reading this, then your father and I are gone. You have been the light in our lives since the moment we found you. We want you to know, you were never a replacement, never an act of charity. You were the child we prayed for, and everything we built with you in mind. This will upset your sister, and we're sorry for that. But we trust you'll do what's right, and maybe, just maybe, she'll understand in time. With love, always, Mom." The handwriting wavered near the end, the ink faint, as if she had been tired. I traced the last word with my fingertip. Mom. She had always called me that name with such warmth, like she was reclaiming something that life had denied her before. Now it was up to me to reclaim something too, my dignity. The next morning, I woke up early. The sunlight was pale and soft, filtering through the blinds like forgiveness. I showered, dressed in a simple navy blue suit, tied my hair neatly, and left for the lawyer's office. I didn't feel like the same Alice who used to avoid confrontation. That Alice would have cried herself to sleep. This one had cried enough. When I arrived, the firm's office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Mr. Hendricks, my parents' lawyer, greeted me with a sad smile. "Alice, I wasn't sure you'd be here this early." "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. He nodded, understanding. "Well, your sister's side confirmed. They'll be here soon." I sat in the meeting room, feeling the familiar hum of nerves under my skin. I didn't want to fight, not really. I just wanted them to stop pretending that my pain didn't matter. A few minutes later, the door opened. Jenna walked in first, her face pale but composed, her husband trailing behind her. My aunt and uncle came too, whispering in low voices. The room suddenly felt smaller, charged with everything unsaid. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the estate and the letter left by your parents." Jenna interrupted. "We already know what it says." "Alice got everything, right? Isn't that the big twist?" Her voice was sharp, like she was trying to slice through the tension. I stayed calm. "You can read it yourself. It's their handwriting. Their wishes." She gave a bitter laugh. "Oh, I'm sure they wanted the adopted one to take it all." Her words didn't sting this time. I looked at her steadily. "You know what's funny, Jenna? Mom once told me she used to dream of having 2 daughters who'd take care of each other. She thought that would make her life perfect. Guess she didn't know one of them would spend years trying to erase the other." Her eyes flickered, something like guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion. Mr. Hendricks handed out copies of the documents. As everyone began reading, the room filled with the sound of rustling paper. I watched their faces change. Confusion, disbelief, then panic. My parents had left me their house, their business shares, and their savings. Jenna was to receive the lake cabin and a modest trust fund. Fair but not equal, and equality had always been her obsession. "This is insane," she said finally. "They were manipulated. She probably made them change it when they were sick." Mr. Hendricks spoke firmly. "Mrs. Hayes and Mr. Hayes made these changes 3 years before their passing. They were sound of mind, and the documents were witnessed and notarized." I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just said, "They made their choice because they trusted me to keep their memory alive. You had every chance to be part of that, Jenna." Her face hardened. "You're lying." "I'm not," I said softly. "But even if you think I am, it won't change what they believed." Die silence fell, heavy, suffocating. I could almost hear her thoughts, the disbelief, the crumbling pride. For once, she wasn't the golden daughter, the center of the room. After the meeting, she stormed out. The others followed. Mr. Hendricks gave me a look of quiet sympathy. "Are you all right?" I exhaled slowly. "I think so. It's strange. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired." "That's normal," he said kindly. "Revenge doesn't always bring peace, but truth sometimes does." That line stayed with me all day. Truth brings peace. Maybe that was what I had been chasing, not revenge. But I still couldn't forget that dinner. Her smirk, the laughter, the humiliation. Some wounds deserved acknowledgement. Later that evening, I got a call from my aunt. She was nervous, her voice trembling. "Alice, dear, your sister's saying terrible things about you. That you tricked your parents, that you forged papers." I closed my eyes. "Of course she is. I just thought you should know. People talk." "Let them," I said quietly. "They always have." After we hung up, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. The air smelled faintly of pine and dust. The same scent I remembered from childhood evenings when Mom would call us inside for dinner. Back then I thought family meant love. Now I understood it also meant struggle. As the sky darkened, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Jenna, just one line. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You destroyed us." I typed back, my hand steady. "No, Jenna, you did that when you decided I wasn't one of you." I didn't send it right away. I stared at the words, wondering if there was any point. Finally, I hit send. The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. My sister didn't contact me again. Some relatives sided with her, some stayed neutral. But I didn't chase anyone. I'd spent too much of my life chasing approval. This was the first time I'd let silence speak for me. I focused instead on my parents' house, now mine. I walked through every room, touching the walls, the furniture, the small traces of them that lingered everywhere. The smell of Mom's perfume on an old scarf, Dad's handwriting in the margins of a book. They had loved me in ways my sister never could understand. One afternoon, as I cleaned their study, I found another envelope tucked in the back of a drawer. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note written by my father. "Alice, if your sister ever turns on you, remember, you were never chosen out of pity. You were chosen out of love. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Dad." I sat there for a long time, holding that note. The tears that came were quiet, not angry. I realized then that my revenge wasn't about taking something from Jenna. It was about giving myself back what she'd tried to take. My place, my peace, my worth. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done. Because a few weeks later, Jenna showed up at my doorstep, eyes red, hair disheveled, clutching her purse like it was the last thing keeping her together. "Alice, we need to talk," she said. And as I looked at her standing there, something inside me shifted. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, but I was ready to hear her. That was the beginning of something I didn't expect. Not another battle, but the next, quieter phase of my revenge, the reckoning. When I saw Jenna standing at my door that morning, I didn't say anything at first. I just stared. She looked nothing like the perfect sister who once strutted around in designer clothes, holding her head high and tossing her hair like she owned every room she entered. Her mascara was smudged, her expression tight, and her hands trembled slightly. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. "I know I don't deserve to come in," she said quietly, eyes darting away from mine. "But please, Alice, can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She walked past me, clutching her purse to her chest. The house was warm, filled with morning light, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I could feel her looking around, at the photos I had restored and rehung, the clean order that now filled our parents' home. It wasn't a mansion, just an old house with history in its bones. But it had peace now, and for the first time, I realized that peace was power. She sat on the couch, her shoulders tense. I waited a few seconds before speaking. "You look tired," I said softly. She gave a weak laugh. "I haven't been sleeping, not since that meeting. I can imagine." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I didn't come here to fight." "Good," I replied, sitting opposite her. "Because I'm done fighting." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Alice, I was wrong. About a lot of things." Her voice cracked slightly on the word wrong, and for once, it didn't sound like she was performing. It sounded like she was admitting something real. I said nothing. Just waited. "I used to think you were the reason Mom and Dad drifted from me," she continued. "They gave you attention, time, all these things I thought belonged to me. But now I see I pushed them away myself." Her words came out slowly, haltingly, like each one cost her something. "When I called you adopted at dinner, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I wanted to remind myself that I was special, that I was the real one." She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "But the truth is, you were more of a daughter to them than I ever was." I watched her, unsure how to respond. For years, I had dreamed of hearing her say those words, that she was wrong, that she regretted what she'd done. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel victorious. It felt heavy, like grief. I leaned back slightly. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't live with it anymore," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The anger, the shame. I see you in that house with their pictures on the wall, and I know you're the one keeping them alive. I wanted to destroy that. I wanted to make you feel small because it was easier than facing what I'd become." I stared at her, and in that moment, the years of hurt, the names, the laughter, the rejection, began to unravel. Not disappear, but loosen, like knots slowly coming undone. "I don't hate you, Jenna," I said quietly. "I did once, but not anymore. You hurt me and you can't undo that. But I think I understand you now." She looked up, startled. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "You were scared. Scared of losing love. Scared of not being enough. And I know what that feels like. I've lived that fear my whole life." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're a better person than me." I shook my head. "No. Just someone who's had enough pain to learn when to stop." For a long time, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us like a fragile bridge. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but also a strange kind of relief. She wasn't pretending anymore. After a while, she said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but maybe we can start over someday." I looked at her, and something in me softened. "Maybe, but not today." She nodded, wiping her face. "That's fair." When she left, she paused at the door. "Mom would be proud of you, you know," she said quietly. "You're everything she wanted us to be." The door closed behind her, and I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space she'd left. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt at peace. That was when I realized the revenge was complete. Not because I had taken something from her, but because she finally saw me. Truly saw me, and maybe that was what I had wanted all along. In the weeks that followed, I found myself rebuilding, not just the house, but myself. I started volunteering at the same adoption center where I had been placed as a baby. It felt strange at first, walking into a place where stories like mine began, but soon it became a sanctuary. The children there reminded me of myself, quiet, uncertain, waiting for someone to claim them as their own. I would sit with them, help with homework, listen to their little stories. They didn't know who I was or what I had been through, but somehow, I think they could feel the calm in me, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm. One evening, as I was leaving the center, one of the little girls, maybe 8 years old with curly hair and big brown eyes, ran up to me. She held out a drawing. "It's you," she said proudly. "You have a crown. You're a nice queen." I smiled, my throat tightening. "A nice queen, huh?" She nodded. "Because you help people, but you don't yell." I laughed softly. "That's the best kind of queen, isn't it?" As I walked home that night, I thought about how strange life could be, how pain could carve space for kindness, and how revenge, when tempered by reflection, could become something much gentler: justice, self-respect, and healing. Months later, Jenna called again. This time, her voice sounded steadier. She had started therapy, she said. She wanted to make things right. Not with money, not with property, but with honesty. She was learning to live without resentment. "I don't expect you to trust me again," she said, "but I'd like to try being your sister. For real this time." I paused before answering. Then I said, "Then start by being my friend. Sisters can come later." She laughed softly. "Deal." And just like that, the weight between us began to shift. Slowly, gently. A year after that dinner, the night that started it all, I hosted another one. Not out of pride or to show off what I had gained, but to honor what I had survived. The table was smaller, but full. Neighbors, friends, people from the adoption center, and yes, even Jenna. The laughter was soft, not cruel this time. When I raised my glass, I didn't give a speech. I just said, "To family, the kind we choose and the kind we forgive." Everyone smiled. And for once, there was no pretending, no hidden meanings, just truth. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the table. The candles were burning low, their wax pooling quietly. I took out my mother's letter again, the one that had started it all, and read it one last time. Her words didn't feel like a wound anymore. They felt like a blessing. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box with my father's note. Then I whispered into the stillness of the house. "It's done, Mom. I kept my promise." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, soft and steady, like an answer. And maybe, just maybe, that's what calm revenge really is. Not fire, not fury, but stillness. The kind that comes when you've faced everything meant to break you, and refused to let it. I turned off the lights, letting the quiet fill the space around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. If you've listened this far, thank you for sharing this journey with me. If you believe, like I do, that sometimes the best revenge is finding peace, then stay with me. There are more stories to tell, quiet, powerful stories about strength, dignity, and the calm that comes after the storm. So please like, share, and subscribe to my Calm Revenge, because not all vengeance shouts. Some of it whispers, softly, beautifully, like healing.